Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're going back in time a bit, back to the Trump era. Specifically, we're looking at this document that's basically making the case for a Trump presidency.
Yeah, it's like a what if scenario. What if Trump had face off against Kamala Harris? Never actually happened, of course, but
Right. But even though it's like a hypothetical matchup, it's fascinating. It tells us a lot about what some voters were looking for back then, and what they considered to be like a successful presidency.
absolutely. I mean, different folks have different priorities, right?
Exactly. So this document, it's pretty one-sided, obviously, but I think it's important to like break it down and see what points it's trying to make. See what resonated with some voters.
Definitely. It's a window into a certain mindset, right? A certain way of looking at things.
Okay, so let's start with the economy. This document, it really touts Trump's economic record. Talks about GDP growth, low unemployment, specifically mentions the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which the document claims really boosted business investment.
Right. The argument is that those tax cuts trickled down, helped everyone, but, economics is complicated.
Yeah, it's not always that simple. Like I remember gas prices were crazy high for a while and everyone was feeling it in their wallets, but the GDP numbers didn't seem to reflect that struggle.
Exactly. It's like GDP is one measure of economic health, but it doesn't tell the whole story, right?
Yeah.
Like looking at your weight on a scale, it gives you a number, but it doesn't tell you if you're, healthy or not.
So what are some other ways to measure how the economy is doing? Like what should we be looking at besides GDP?
Well, there's the Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality. So are the benefits of economic growth being shared broadly, or is the gap between the rich and poor getting wider? And then there's the Human Development Index, which takes into account things like education and life expectancy. It gives you a sense of whether people's lives are actually improving.
Okay, so a lot more to it than just a single number. Got it. So moving on to foreign policy, the document really emphasizes Trump's America First approach, renegotiating trade deals, taking a hard line on military alliances. But what does America First actually mean in practice?
Well, essentially, America First is about putting American interests first, right? In foreign policy, this often means economic protectionism, a skeptical view of international agreements, that kind of thing. It's a shift away from multilateralism, which is about working cooperatively with other countries, toward the more unilateral approach, the U.S. acting independently.
So how did that approach actually play out? Did it actually benefit America?
Well, there's no easy answer to that. Some people argue that it led to more favorable trade deals for the U.S., but others say it damaged relationships with long-standing allies and even sparked trade wars. So, mixed bag.
Yeah, foreign policy is always so complex. Right? Okay, let's move on to something that has a huge impact but doesn't always get as much attention. Judicial appointments. The document highlights Trump's 3 Supreme Court picks, saying they helped create a more conservative judiciary.
Right, and this is where things get really interesting because those appointments have long-lasting effects way beyond any one presidency.
So what does a conservative tilt on the Supreme Court actually mean in practice? How does it affect people's lives?
Well, think about cases like Dobbs v. Jackson, which overturned Roe v. Wade. That ruling ended the constitutional right to abortion, and it really ignited a firestorm of debate. It shows how the Supreme Court can fundamentally reshape social policy. A more conservative court often favors originalism, which means interpreting the Constitution based on what they believe its original meaning was. That can lead to different outcomes on issues like gun control, affirmative action, religious freedom.
Right, so the impact goes way beyond just legal theory. It's about real people's lives. Okay, so this document, it also touches on a few other key areas: tax cuts, immigration, and Trump's leadership style. On taxes, it basically claims that everyone benefited, but did they? I mean, did everyone really come out ahead?
Well, tax cuts can definitely stimulate the economy, right? Put more money in people's pockets. But the impact isn't always equal. Some argue that the 2017 tax cuts disproportionately benefited wealthier Americans and corporations, while others argue that they created jobs which ultimately helped everyone. It's complicated. It depends on who you ask, how you measure the impact.
Right, like whose perspective are you looking at it from? Makes sense. Okay, what about immigration? The document really focuses on border security, which is a big part of Trump's platform. But what about pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants? Did the document address that at all?
Well, not really. You see, the Trump administration was very focused on border security. They increased enforcement, built physical barriers, but they also limited legal immigration and made it more difficult for people to seek asylum or a path to citizenship. So, it had a huge impact on millions of people, separated families, and raised questions about, America's role as a haven for immigrants.
Right. So it's important to look at all sides of the issue, right? Not just one perspective. Okay, so last thing from the document.
Yeah.
It describes Trump's leadership style as bold and decisive, especially during crises. And it seems like that appealed to a lot of voters.
Yeah, I mean, decisiveness can be a good thing, right? It can project confidence, allow for quick action. But sometimes that shoot first, ask questions later approach can backfire. It can lead to, unintended consequences.
So when is decisiveness a good thing? And when is it maybe not the best approach?
Well, think about the early days of the pandemic. Quick action was definitely needed, but some people argue that a more measured, science-based approach could have saved lives, prevented some of the economic fallout. It's all about finding that balance between decisive action and thoughtful consideration, especially when the stakes are high.
Right, tough decisions. Okay, so the document goes on to say that Kamala Harris's policies lean towards more government control, which it suggests would limit freedoms, potentially even lead to unrest.
Right. That's a common critique of more progressive policies. But it really gets to the heart of the debate about the role of government. How much intervention is appropriate? Where do you draw the line between regulation and individual liberty?
That's a question that's been around forever, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's a timeless debate. And there's no easy answer. Think about it. Seatbelt laws. They restrict your freedom to choose, but they also save lives. Environmental regulations might limit industrial activity, but they protect our air and water. It's a balancing act.
It is. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about economic indicators, foreign policy, Supreme Court picks, taxes, immigration, leadership styles, the role of government.
Yeah.
And all of this from one document that's arguing in favor of a Trump presidency.
Right. And it just goes to show that these issues are complex. There's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Definitely. Always multiple sides to every issue. Well, before we wrap up, any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. As you continue to explore these issues and, any political argument, really, think about this. Beyond policies and platforms, what about the less tangible aspects of leadership? Things like trust, empathy, vision. How much do those qualities matter to you in a president?
That's a great question. A lot to ponder there. So remember, everyone, this deep dive has given you the tools to analyze any political argument. Now go out there and be informed citizens.